just to start by introducing who I am. My name is Tania Martin, and I am a neuro-inclusion consultant and founder of an organisation called PegSquared. My background is quite varied in that actually I started my life in recruitment about 20 years ago in external hiring. I then went on to hire both graduates and experienced hires at KPMG. And then I took a step out of recruitment for a number of years and did a number of internal operations and project and transformation type roles. In that time, I became a hiring manager. I spent a lot of time writing job descriptions. Towards the end of my time at EY, so I spent 10 years at EY, I was responsible for an operating model review and wrote a lot of job descriptions during that period of time. And then I had the most amazing opportunity to set up EY's Neurodiverse Centre of Excellence. And I was responsible for all of our people process. So once again, found myself back in the recruitment seat again. And it definitely felt like I'd gone full circle. But what I was being asked to do this time was think about not only our job descriptions, but our whole entire recruitment process in a completely different way to how I had done so in my career to date. And today's webinar is almost me giving a bit of a download to you all around what I learned about writing neuro-inclusive job descriptions. Also, just to share, I have ADHD myself, so this comes from a place of both professional experience, but also personal lived experience as well. So, what to expect from the next 45 minutes or so? I can't do a session on neurodiversity without giving you an introduction as to what neurodiversity actually is. So I'll do a very quick understanding of the language that I will be using in today's session. I'll then move on to a little bit around why we're even having this conversation around neurodiversity and recruitment, pick up on some of the common challenges those that are neurodivergent face when it comes to the recruitment process. Then I'll dive into the detail of these 5 key steps to building more neuro-inclusive job descriptions. I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we did at EY in terms of some of the good practice that exists. And I'll end on just introducing the recruitment audit that I am currently undertaking with organisations. And then obviously the opportunity to ask me any questions. If you do want to ask any questions, please do put them in the chat. I'm not entirely sure I can see it. Please don't put them in the chat because I can't find it. I'll see if I can locate it. But to put them in the chat, but I'll open up to questions right at the end as well. Right, let's dive in. I will say I am about to give you a whole heap of information and it might feel like quite a lot of information. But what I will do is within the next 7 days, send you out a little guide on this as well. So don't be worried if I've spoken quite a lot. I will summarise it for you as well after the session. So let's start with 3 of the key terms that I use when I'm talking about neurodiversity. So the language is evolving. I've been in the space for about 5 years now, and it has evolved in that time. We must always be individual-led when talking about neurodiversity. So if you're talking to an individual who's neurodivergent, they may have their own preference, and that's absolutely fine. But one of the things that we found incredibly useful at EY and with other organisations that I've worked at is to get really clear on some terms that we would use as an organisation, so we all have the same language when we talk about neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is actually everybody. We all have brains as unique as our fingerprints. We all have preferences in terms of how we communicate, how we process information. We all think and we all behave differently. So neurodiversity is actually an umbrella term that refers to every single one of us. The term neurodivergent might also be, you might hear the term neurospicy as well for this, but this is when somebody has a cognitive variation in terms of the way that they think and process information, and it impacts about 15 to 20% of the population. And I remember the first time I heard that statistic. That is 1 in 5. That's 1 in 5 people that might already be within your organization, who might be going through your recruitment process right now, and was a much bigger percentage than I initially believed when I started out in the role at EY a number of years ago. It includes neurotypes such as ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and Tourette's. And I'm not going to dive into a huge amount of detail as to what each of those are in today's session, but it's just so that you're aware of some of those key terms. The one thing I will say, there's a huge amount of co-occurrence between a lot of those different neurotypes. So it is really important that when we're dealing with somebody who's neurodivergent, we do deal with them as a person, as an individual, and we ask them what they need, as opposed to making any assumptions because they have said, for example, they've got ADHD. And then neurotypical is everybody else. So it describes people whose brain functions in ways society considers standard or typical. One of the things that's really interesting when you talk about neurodiversity is balancing challenges and strengths. So what do I mean by that? There is a move around the language around neurodiversity about how do we harness people's strengths, and that is absolutely the right way the narrative should be going. In terms of organisations should be harnessing neurodivergent strengths. We should be setting up work environments where all can succeed regardless of their neurotype. But we should never, ever forget that people who are neurodivergent do have challenges as well. And a really good way to illustrate this is to have a look at the spiky profile. So what you will instantly see on this is the IQ line is static. So neurodiversity has absolutely no impact on whether somebody is intelligent or not. What we tend to talk about is some of the executive functioning skills that people might have, where they might have some challenges. So let's have a look at Rohit and Jane. Rohit is dyslexic. As a result, he is really good at visual thinking, great at building relationships, really good at spotting patterns in data. However, has some challenges around sound processing, might find it difficult to get his ideas down on a piece of paper, and potentially has some challenges around reading and spelling as well. And then let's have a look at Jane, who's autistic. She's an analytical thinker. She has great attention to detail, and she loves to solve a problem. Sorry. On the flip side, she has potential sensory challenges. She is often at risk of being misunderstood when she communicates, and she also has challenges managing multiple activities simultaneously. What's really interesting about Rohit and Jane is actually, if you put both of these two people in a team, they would complement each other really well. So you have Rohit that would be really happy to go out and speak to clients, and then you have Jane that sits in the background. I'm really sorry. I've got to pause a second because I forgot to get some water and I'm about to not be able to speak. So bear with me, just 1 second, sorry. I'm so sorry, about to have a coughing fit in the middle of what I'm talking about, so that's not great. I'm sorry, right, so what's I talking about? So Jane and Rohit do complement each other really well in terms of the skill sets that they bring to that team. And this is one of the things that I talk to organisations quite a lot about. And when we start to think about job descriptions, this is the starting point. So what we often don't do is step back and go, what are the skills that we have in our team right now? Where do people shine? Where are people at their absolute best in our team? And what are the gaps as a result of looking at the team as it currently stands? And I can say this because I have been a hiring manager, and I have taken that step back and I've gone, right, okay, I need to hire somebody. And what I tend to do is just dust off the last job description that I had before. And I don't consider it holistically in terms of what are the actual gaps, the skills gaps that I've got within my team. So, for example, rather than hiring somebody that has got brilliant presentation skills and excellent written abilities, why can I not look at what I've got in my team already and start asking those questions? Actually, I've got somebody that's exceptional at presenting, so therefore I don't need to have that as something that's essential for this person who next joins my team. And I think the spiky profile is a really interesting way to start to think about, actually, let's consider the strengths I have within my team as opposed to recruiting this well-rounded individual. So, why are we even talking about this? Statistics are insane when it comes to unemployment and underemployment in terms of autism in the UK. So there's 69 to 78% of autistic adults in the UK that really struggle to get into any form of employment or find roles where they're not using their whole skill set. And the traditional recruitment process is probably the biggest barrier to entry for those that are neurodivergent, and it unintentionally screens out neurodivergent talent. And this becomes even more so a challenge when we start to think about AI, etc., that we're starting to use within our processes, bearing in mind we don't consistently collect data around neurodiversity at the moment. So we're using AI models that are instantaneously going to screen out that 20%. But what's also interesting is that when you start to dig into this neurodiversity recruitment gap, it has a much broader impact. Neurodiversity is the only area of DEI that it doesn't matter if you're female, it doesn't matter what colour of your skin, it doesn't matter your sexuality. It goes across all of the different DEI pillars. And what you're asking organisations to think about differently when we're talking about neurodiversity is not how do we attract more of these people, but how do we have to adapt the way we do this in order to attract a broader cohort of candidates coming through. And there are some examples. So, for example, with women, they, very similarly to those that are neurodivergent, won't apply if they don't tick all of the boxes on a job description. Generation Z, they are a generation that are coming through at the moment that if you aren't talking about neurodiversity on your job descriptions, they might start to question that, because actually the percentage of people that identify or self-identify as neurodivergent in that population make up about 50% of the population. That's way more than the 20% that we alluded to earlier in terms of who are neurodivergent. They're much more attached to their labels. So there is a much broader impact in terms of tweaking the recruitment process, and it's not big changes often that make a big difference for those that are both neurodivergent and that broader impact, but making it more accessible to a broader range of people. So what are the common challenges faced by those that are neurodivergent when it comes to job descriptions? So the first is literal interpretation. So the challenge around this is neurodivergent candidates often interpret requirements literally. So, for example, if your job description says, I would like 5+ years experience, they might go, well, I've got 4 years and 11 months, so therefore I'm not qualified. The reality is you probably happily interview somebody with 4 years of strong experience. So just bear in mind that literal thinking. Information overload. So if you are neurodivergent and you're faced with a dense wall of text, job descriptions can cause cognitive overwhelm. And if we think about job descriptions, and this is one of the things that came out with my team when we looked at them, is that there is so much fluff, I call it fluff, in job specs. And actually what people are trying to find is, what's the role? Tell me what you need me to be doing and what I need to in order to be able to do that. And everything else is just kind of words around it. So they're looking for that information, they're seeking that information out. And often we put in huge long paragraphs, often with no clear structure, often using acronyms that are only relevant to an organisation. And therefore, neurodivergent talent potentially switches off midway through reading the job spec. Ambiguous language creates anxiety. So vague terms can trigger self-doubt. So fast-paced environment, and I'm going to talk about this one a little bit in a little bit more detail as we go through this. How fast? What type of pace? What does that actually mean? What? So if you think about fast-paced environment, literally, what is that actually saying to you? What is a fast-paced environment? Is that the environment running outside? That's how it could potentially be misinterpreted. So words like that. Excellent communication skills, and I'll definitely come on to this one. Verbal, written. What does that actually mean? What are you actually looking for? Presentations, all of the above. And then cultural fit. What culture? And how do I know if I fit within that culture? What does that actually mean? Moving on to the everything required assumption. So the challenge here is there's no distinction being made between the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. So you've just got a really long list. So 15 different skills and requirements, and the candidate thinks, I need to be able to do all of these in order to apply. And the reality is you're only looking for 3 and 4, and willingness to learn for the others. And then finally, masking triggers. So this is around the social requirements that make neurodivergent candidates feel that they need to perform rather than be authentic. So these terms such as outgoing personality, this triggers worry about appearing wrong, or a natural networker suggests a communication style that potentially might not necessarily fit that individual. And as a result, they don't apply, or they exhaust themselves trying to be somebody else, trying to fit in with the environment, or even throughout that interview process. I will turn up, I will make eye contact with you because that is what I am thinking you expect of me, even though I find that really difficult. So that those masking those triggers is potentially overwhelming and exhausting for those that are neurodivergent. So if we can be more specific about what we're asking for, this is a really good way to make your job descriptions more neuro-inclusive. Right, I'm going to move on to the 5 steps. So let's start with step 1. And this seems really obvious, and I know lots of organizations are doing this already. And this is very much around the I have to tick every box in order to apply. And if I don't, then I can't, I shouldn't apply. That's, you're not looking for me. So there is a way you can start to think differently about how do you look at the skills that you are wanting to put in your job description and ask. So step 1 is the day 1 test. So what does someone absolutely need to be successful on day 1? i.e. they can't learn it quickly, but if they could pick it up in the first month, it's probably desirable rather than essential. And if it is a nice to have but not critical, then don't put it on the job description at all. Step 2 is the perfect candidate reality check. So are you looking for that perfect candidate with every skill? You're unlikely to find them. So have a think about what if they're overqualified and they're going to leave. Think about actually what are the skills you actually need, as opposed to trying to find this perfect candidate. And then skills versus capabilities. The skills can obviously be taught. Capabilities are harder to develop. So focus your essentials on capabilities and put the skills in the desirable, unless it is something they absolutely need to have on the day one. And remember, your essentials are non-negotiable. Everything else is negotiable. And as I mentioned earlier, it's like the research genuinely backs this up. So women only apply when they meet the criteria that are put in front of them. Neurodivergent candidates, similar as well. They're more likely to self-select out if they don't feel like they tick all of the boxes. So let's have a look at some examples. So these are actual real life examples that I have pulled off job specs recently, and there's some good in here as well as some questionable. So we don't believe hiring is a tick box exercise. So if you feel that you don't match the job description 100%, but you would be a great fit for the role, please get in touch. I actually really like this sentence. It was the end of a list of requirements. The tick box exercise piece probably would need rewording based on the fact that that could potentially literally be taken slightly differently, but it is a good example. This is one, it would be great if you also had, is another way to say desirable. It could be potentially misinterpreted, but it does say what they're looking for. It could be a bit more specific in terms of just saying desirable qualities. Sometimes less is more. Simplicity is key when you're writing job descriptions, particularly for those that are neurodivergent. And this is actually one of the ones that we used at EY for the technologists that I was recruiting. And this is, we're looking for people who have an interest in technology and have 2 or more of the following technical skills. And this is something that we learned of the US, is saying, right, I'm going to give you a list of things. However, don't feel like you need to tick any more than 2 of them. If you can tick 2 of them, great. We'd like you to apply, as opposed to them seeing the list and going, I can't apply to that. And then on the right-hand side, this one I picked out because actually, yes, they have split it up. I actually found this quite overwhelming. That is quite a list of required expertise that they're looking for. The required should be probably no more than 5 skills that you are looking to bring in. So that's step 1. Step 2, this is looking at taking those vague soft skill descriptions and replacing them with specific job relevant descriptions. And our job descriptions everywhere are littered with these phrases. It's a bit like corporate buzzword bingo in terms of picking these things up. And actually they can be very unhelpful sometimes for those that are neurodivergent. So let's look at the word proactive. We will all know, sorry. So proactive is quite vague. What specific action does this mean? There's much better ways that you can communicate the word proactive. I'll move on to that in a minute. Problem-solving mindset is quite abstract. What does this actually look like in practice? And passion is quite an emotive language, and it may not resonate with everybody. So what it also does in this sentence is it combines multiple different concepts without clear separation. So, for example, we could write this in a number of different ways. So a more concrete version would be takes initiative to identify and resolve issues before they impact customers. It says exactly the same thing, but it says it in a more literal way. It's exactly what the candidate is going to be asked to do. You might also want to break it down. So able to identify potential problems early, propose solutions independently, and focus on improving customer experience. So once again, breaks what is quite a vague sentence into really specific deliverables. You might want to think about it in terms of action focused. So the candidate looks for ways to improve processes and solve customer problems without waiting to be asked. Once again, says the same thing, is just incredibly specific in terms of what you're asking the candidate to do. And then skills-based. So you could also say strong analytical and problem-solving skills with focus on customer outcomes. And the whole point of this is to take away the vagueness of what has been written and make it more tangible for the candidate who's applying. They actually know what is being asked of them, as opposed to the vague sentence that is written here. So let's have a think about what are the components of building a specific job relevant description. So number one, remove any subjective traits, personality traits. 2, add specific tasks and activities, what are they actually going to be doing. Number 3 is include a preferred communication method if possible. I'll give you some examples of this in a second. Number 4 is describe measurable outcomes where possible. So what's the point of what they're doing? And number 5 is focus on what actually happens day to day. 5 was really interesting, actually, because when I asked my team for feedback, bearing in mind they'd gone through the process, one of the things that was really clear, and we worked quite a lot on the job description for the second cohort, was we didn't really know what the job was. We didn't know what we were going to be doing. We didn't know whether it was hybrid or in the office, or if we're out on client sites or what. So being really specific about that, what actually happens on a day-to-day basis, is really useful. So let's run through these really quickly. So let's look at communication skills. So I can't tell you how many times I have read just the phrase excellent communication skills in a job description whilst doing the research for this. How much clearer is the ability to write clear project status reports and respond to stakeholder queries via email within 24 hours? You've got the time frame there, you've got the method of communication, the reason why you need that person to be communicating. It's a lot more specific. Team player, I hate this phrase. I actually couldn't personally describe to you what that actually means. And I think if we all were to ask each other that question, we'd probably all come up with something slightly different. So, for example, an alternative to this is comfortable in participating in weekly stand-up meetings and contributing to shared project planning documents. Strong interpersonal abilities, able to gather requirements from internal stakeholders through structured interviews and follow-up questionnaires. So what are you actually asking the person to do? Actually, what we need is for them to be comfortable dealing with internal stakeholders and getting information off them using this format. Natural leadership skills. So responsible for coordinating project timelines, cross-functional teams through written briefs and scheduled check-ins. It's just making them more broad. What are we actually asking of the candidate? Excellent problem solving and analytical thinking. And this is the ability to analyze data patterns, identify anomalies, and document findings with recommended solutions in written reports. And I do appreciate that we're not going to be able to be this detailed for every single piece of the job spec. But if there is an ability to misinterpret, or there is an element of vagueness in what is being written, just question what is it? What is it we're going to actually be asking the person to do? Particularly when you think about something like communication skills. When we're talking about those that are neurodivergent, think back to those spiky profiles. You've got one person who's potentially loves doing presentations, loves talking, and then you've got somebody else who would much prefer to write an email. And we all have our own preferences as how we communicate. So let's be clear on what the actual ask is. Step 3 is remove unnecessary social requirements. So there's a lot of these that fall into job specs. Social traits that just really aren't relevant. And these can be incredibly challenging because not only does it paint a picture of the organization that might be misinterpreted, it also starts to build an organization that is full of very similar people. So cultural fit, for example, is an incredibly dangerous phrase in recruitment because what it is actually saying is it's people like us or people who communicate like us. But actually, innovation comes from different perspectives, not from hiring the same person over and over and over again. Natural networker is another one. So what we're basically saying is extroverted relationship builder. But on the flip side, you can be introverted and build incredibly strong client relationships because they potentially listen more, they prepare thoroughly, and they follow up consistently. They might just not be the person who is working the room at a corporate event. It doesn't mean that they can't do that role of building relationships with clients. And then words like dynamic personality. So this translates to entertaining or socially confident. But the reality is do you want somebody who is a financial analyst, for example, to be dynamic, or do you want them to be accurate? Do you want a cybersecurity expert who is the life and soul of the party, or do you want them to be able to spot the patterns that no one else sees? So these are just some of those phrases just to be aware of in job specs, and just start removing them because they are portraying a culture or an organization in a way that potentially excludes people. And might actually not be how your organization is set up anyway. So these are just some more examples of what you might want to replace them with. Must be comfortable networking at industry events, builds relationships with key industry contacts to generate new business opportunities. Excellent presentation skills for client meetings, communicates project updates and recommendations to the client. It's a really small change, but what it is not saying is you have to be able to present, you just need to be able to communicate it. Dynamic personality represents the company's professionally and client interactions. It just removes those social expectations. Step 4 is focusing on outcomes rather than methods. And I have to say, of the job descriptions that I've looked at recently, a lot of organizations are doing this so much better. So it's not about how should this be done, it is what outcome do we need? Because the reality is that not all of us work in the same way. And actually, if we want a diverse workforce, we need to accept that one person's way of doing something might be different to another person's way of doing something. And that's where, and it doesn't matter as long as the end result is the same at the end of the day. So let's have a look at this phrase, the dynamic, fast-paced environment challenge. So how this can be misinterpreted. What we thought we meant is can handle pressure and challenging priorities. What the candidates heard is a chaotic workplace where I'll constantly be interrupted. And what we actually need is somebody who can manage multiple concurrent projects with shifting deadlines. So that is the outcome that we want. We want somebody to manage multiple concurrent projects with shifting deadlines. So instead of so to be outcome focused, when we write this, we think about, okay, let's be specific. Manage 3 to 5 concurrent projects with priorities that may shift weekly based on client needs. Typical project timelines are 2 to 4 weeks with regular milestone check-ins. Really specific, and takes away that ambiguity of that dynamic, fast-paced environment that we very often see on job descriptions. The other challenge around that phrasing is that the reality is, if you're neurodivergent, you might read that and think, I don't know what you're asking of me. ADHD brains very often excel in intense focus periods rather than constant collaboration. Those that are autistic might build stronger relationships through consistent structured interactions rather than spontaneous networking. And dyslexic thinkers might communicate complex ideas better through visual presentations rather than written reports. So when we are focusing on the outcomes, what we do is we discover a better way of achieving those goals, as opposed to having these more vague, high level, don't really understand what it means, because actually the way that we get there may be different depending on the person who is doing it and how that person works. And I will pull up there's a really good example of this in terms of innovation from some of the work that the Neurodiverse Centres of Excellence did at EY. So the first one was an example of a couple of individuals that were asked to do an incredibly mundane task around data, and they were asked to complete it over a series of weeks. And rather than complete the task, what they did is they built a tool to complete the task for them. So the outcome was the same. The task was complete. The method was different. And actually, by building the tool, the work got done quicker. And then there's another example of somebody within my team who was super dyslexic, and what he used to find was that emails were really challenging. So his manager used to sit down with him every morning and go, right, read these 5, don't worry about the rest of them. So by doing that, by making that tiny change for him, he was able to focus on the client problem in terms of solving the solutions for the clients quicker. Right. So it's very much about asking the right questions when you're thinking about the job descriptions. I'm not going to go through this because I've just seen I only have 5 minutes left, and I can't believe I've only got 5 minutes left. That's just typical me, talking too much. And I will make sure that you get access to these questions coming up. And then finally, step 5. This is all about adding that explicit welcome and adjustment information. So it could be as simple as having a statement on there just saying we actively welcome applications from neurodivergent candidates, and we will offer you adjustments. One of the things that we did in the job descriptions we created at EY is we actually gave some examples of some of the adjustments that we would put in place. And we were open to ideas. So it's like, we're open to any suggestions that you might have. You might also want to think about highlighting flexible working, highlighting the actual work environment that they're going to be working within, mention quiet workspace options, etc. So if you are a hybrid organisation, expand on that a little bit more. What percentage will they need to be able to have to spend in the office? Are they able to travel in early, late, etc.? What is the actual workspace like? So there are different zones within the office, and you can find somewhere that's quiet, etc. Very, very quickly on the EY piece. So we went the extra mile when it was looking at job descriptions. We ensured that the information was accessible in multiple different formats. So there was video, there was audio, there's infographic. We provided more information, but in a really structured way. So there was examples of the recruitment process, what that looks like, what do the timelines look like. It was really clear in terms of what the expectation was. We also were really clear on what the closing date was. We didn't close it before the closing date, which is one of the biggest frustrations, because if you're ADHD, you're likely to do it the day before. We did ask people to apply early if they could. So there were tweaks we made to the recruitment process off the back of the feedback that I got from my team about actually what would be useful to be seen in the job description. And the job description was actually an online booklet that they could go through, as I said, with really clear contents in terms of where they can find the information that they need. Lots of bullet points as well, so that it was clear and concise as much as possible. I'm going to stop and ask if there are any questions at this point in time. And I can see if I can find. Nothing at this stage. Sorry, no questions have come through. Small ask from me. Hopefully you have found this useful. I would love it if you have found it useful. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. It would be amazing if something's resonated, if you wouldn't just mind maybe putting a post on LinkedIn to say that you've attended the webinar today and you've got some really useful takeaways from this session. That would be really, really helpful. I have another webinar coming up next month on the application process. I will talk less next time. My next steps, as I said, I'm more than happy. I'll pull this into a bit of a guide for everybody that's attended, and I will send that across to you in the next 7 days. But I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody for joining today. I hope you have found it useful and you've taken away something that you can implement, hopefully straight away, into what you do on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much.